Well, good afternoon, everybody. We have today with us Kim Banta, who is state representative for the 63rd District in Kentucky. Kim, thanks for taking some time to chat with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
Absolutely. Well, you're newer in your role as the state representative anyway, lifelong educator and administrator. But maybe before we get into the session and your service, maybe you'd just like to share with the community your background if they didn't already know what Kim Banta is all about.
Sure. Started as a teacher, ended my career as chief academic officer in Kenton County, was a principal for 10 years at Dixie Heights High School. Love education, love teachers, and anybody that works with kids, it takes a lot of grit.
Amen. Amen. That's a job. Well, one of many jobs I could never do for sure. So you have this legacy of education and community involvement in a lot of ways, and then you stepped up and you won the race for 63rd District, and then you went to Frankfort, and you've got a very unique session. Maybe you could just share with us what that was like to walk in as a freshman representative and then go into the COVID issues.
Well, everything started out in January fairly normal. And it was awesome because it's like going to school for free every single day, because people come in and you start learning about stuff, and you learn about issues all over Kentucky, things that you never had any idea existed. And that is so much fun. It's just so much fun to hear about and be part of fixing some issues and celebrating other things that are going on in Kentucky. And then we started getting into February and people started, it was starting to be like pandemic. And then I can remember being in the Republican committee meeting when the governor closed down the churches. And you kind of got this feeling like, ooh, that felt odd, because separation, church and state, it felt different. And then, he wouldn't call the session. So we kept going, and right around, we took 1 week off, and then we went back, and you're going to work, and people are protesting you going to work because they want you to, go home, shelter in place, stay safe. We're like, we can't, we have a job to do. We have to vote on these bills. Something has to get done. So, we stayed through it. I probably went through a gallon of hand sanitizer, and I didn't wear a mask in committees and things like that, because I think it's important that when people are presenting to you, that they see, your facial expressions, and do you have a question? Do you, or do they need to elaborate? So it was very strange up until midnight on Sine Die.
And the unique way of voting, that being able to, I guess, vote remotely,
yes.
All those things.
Yeah, it's in your office, filling out the piece of paper, taking a picture of it, sending it to your floor leaders so that they can call and tell you, say the way you voted. Now, what was interesting is you're drinking out of the fire hose. So the bill comes up, you're filling it out really quick. Well, I accidentally picked up the wrong thing and took a picture of it. And I get this text back saying, that's not on the floor. Well, I accidentally voted on the wrong, so I had to shred that, undo it. It would be fine, except they're going so fast. It's 9:30 at night by now, around 11 o'clock, my vision starts to blur and eyes roll back in my head. So that it was an experience. I wouldn't trade it for the world, but it was an experience.
So, and you got, as I referred to, you got such a unique perspective on what these schools had to go through, though. So when everyone was shutting down and shifting, and I know you still have a lot of both people who used to work with you and for you who had to deal with that. Any insight what we should be knowing, if those of us weren't involved in that, what they had to go through, and I guess maybe even what they're now having to go through to plan for hopefully a safe reopening?
Yeah. If you can imagine, on any good day, you've got 50% of the people agreeing with the decision you made on a good day. So they had to come up with overnight practically a way to work with kids the way we're working together right now, with 140, 50 kids, and turning in assignments, and some kids disappeared. I mean, they flipped the switch, they flipped the narrative, and they did a great job. I don't know how much better they could have done. I don't like NTI. It is not my preferred way to deliver education, because I think educators need to have their eyes on kids, because not everybody has a really strong structure at home. And, we like to look at kids, make sure they're eating, and even though they kept the food going, which was great, but did everybody get to it? Did you have the parent that made the effort to get them there to get it? So those are the kind of things that educators worry about. Did you really understand it? Or are you just trying to get me, because it's easy for you to look at a screen and them go, yeah, I got it, when they don't got it. So, but the teachers, I mean, they really did. They flipped it and they did well. And I know that there's several things in place for next year. What if this, what if this, what if this? The original CDC guidelines for buses, I ran transportation at central office for a while. If you put one child per seat on a bus to get them to school, we would have to double our fleet. You can't get everybody to school that way. So it's going to be very interesting to see if things loosen up, if there's a second wave, but we need to get kids back in school.
Yeah, almost balancing. I can't imagine it's easy for those of us on the outside to give a solution, but when you've got to sign the document or put a stamp on approval on a process yourself as an administrator or principal or whatever, I mean, it's a totally different world. I see. Can't imagine it, but I respect it. And any sense of planning, and we've heard it from a number of people about the students who didn't have access to internet, or a lot of kids at home and maybe limited devices. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit too, of maybe what you've heard or what you've seen.
Well, I have heard that many kids did not have access to devices, or the devices were old. And when I talked to teachers, I said, well, what did you do about that? Well, I loaded the programs up and I took them the paperwork. We met and I gave them the paperwork. So there was a lot of that going around. A lot of teachers still going into school, making copies for stuff, and then taking it to the children that can't get to it.
Yeah. So let's go back to the session in Frankfort. Any perspective that you have on looking at the, Senator McDaniel, for example, has pointed out on their side the likely budget shortfall because of gas revenues, but likely going back and having to evaluate the budget as you all passed a 1-year budget as opposed to a 2-year. Any perspective there? Again, from your newer eyes to the issues of Frankfort.
Well, just watching everything that's going on, I don't know how we're going to have any money at all. So, I mean, I think it's going to be back to the drawing board and try to figure out how to get everything back on track. Now, please understand that we do not get any communication. Anything that we find out, we have to dig for, read. We don't have weekly calls. We don't have people saying, okay, this might happen, and we're thinking about this because the budget is short here by 10% or so. That doesn't happen. So mainly, because we have a Democratic governor and a Republican House majority. So
yeah, that disconnect, unfortunately, but
it is.
Well, I guess when you look at it down the road, I guess the point you're making there is there are going to be some tough decisions to make. Now, when you make them, when you have to make those tough decisions, when you're going to have to make those tough decisions when you go back into session, that's when the work really is all full throttle to dive in and figure out what the limits are. So any takeaways, for those who are seeing what's happening in the community with COVID, or even just in general for Frankfort, that you could offer an insight for those who might be even thinking down the road they want to get into city council or run for other office, and do those things in terms of any takeaway that you've learned?
I think that if you're thinking about doing that, that you have to be open to all ideas, and you need to be extremely patient with all ideas and hear it out, because sometimes you start to hear something and you're like, I don't know where this is going, but that's really strange. But then it gets to the end of it and you're like, I get it. Okay, now it's learning. It's learning so you have to love learning if you decide to do something like this. And you have to, I mean, I probably spend 2 hours a day on unemployment issues and talking to people about unemployment. And so I've learned more about unemployment. I've learned more about insurance coverage than I ever wanted to know. And because you've got to help people. So and I love helping people. So that's been fun. I kind of over the unemployment thing. I would like that to rectify itself for the poor people that are waiting for money.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Well, and I guess the good news is, in general, with the Northern Kentucky Caucus works well together and listens, and generally, and is always trying to, I think, to your point, learning and do the right thing for not only our region, but for the state. So in the meantime, hopefully this, to your point also, that the unemployment access to that ramps up as quickly as possible, and people can at least get that stability that was intended to provide.
Yes.
Well, Representative, thanks so much for spending a few minutes and with us, and thanks for your service. Your entire life's been built around service, and this is just the next piece of that. So we really appreciate all the work you're doing.
Well, thank you so much, and you have a great afternoon.